Welcome back to another 15-minute podcast with Leadership Lenses. We have part 2 today with Cheryl Maayan. Cheryl, for those of you who did not tune in last week, is the director of the Day School Leadership Training Institute at Prisma, a former head of school who now mentors and trains new heads and helps them be the best heads that they can be. Last week, we talked about relationships and values. We're going to shift this week, and one of Cheryl's other specialties is fundraising. And that, for some heads, is an exciting word. For some heads, is a terrifying word. So just to open it up, Cheryl, what do you tell new heads that suddenly have to raise money instead of just teaching?
Well, I tell them a lot of things. So I think one of the most important things is that starting with a strategic development plan is really essential. That when you start the year, you and your development committee from the board and your development director need to be fully aligned on what your development goals are and what your strategies are to achieve those goals by the end of the year. It's really easy to get off course with development if you don't have a plan, and it's easy to chase a good idea that's not really a good use of time. In my experience, about once a year, I would have someone come to me and suggest we have a golf tournament, or we take donated cars and sell them, or things that are not bad ideas, but they have a cost in terms of personnel time. So you're gonna be armed with a strategic plan. You're going to be able to respond a little bit more thoughtfully if you have a strategic development plan and you're starting your year with those goals and strategies outlined.
I totally believe in that. I still have my notes from the strategic development intensive that I went to with Peach, I think in 2012. What are the components of that kind of strategic plan, and when should you be making it when you're a new head of school? Is this a September 1st thing? Is this earlier? How do you build that out?
Well, it's earlier than September 1st because you want to build it out starting once the budget for the new fiscal year is approved. You know what your development goal is, right? And unless there's an additional campaign for something that's off budget, you should at least have that set. So if you know you need to raise, let's just say $1 million for the coming school year, you need to break that down and decide we typically raise, $200,000 for our annual appeal. We might raise another $300,000 at our gala. We might raise another $250,000 in grants. And then we need to decide how we're going to raise the additional $250,000. And once you have that broken down, you also want to calendar it out. So, and you can sort of mitigate some conflicts as well. Because sometimes like the Parent Teacher Association will want to do a really fun fundraising event for their budget, like a trivia night. That's a big Midwest thing. We do trivia nights. And if they're asking for sponsorship for the trivia night, sometimes a donor may be confused because they feel like they've given a sponsorship if they sponsored trivia night, but then you're asking for a sponsorship for the gala a couple months later that is significantly more than they paid for the trivia night. So having that outlined and calendared will also help you effectively with other fundraising efforts that are happening that aren't right through your development department.
Mm-hmm. And what you said about the trivia night and the gala, I think, is key. We cannibalize ourselves because we go ask somebody for $500 and then we come back a month later and ask them for $5,000 and they say no to the $5,000 because we just showed up. It took me a number of years to learn this as a head, but what we used to do at the beginning of the summer, like July 1st, was sit down with the development committee and set ourselves up for a 6-hour meeting. It was like intense, no stopping, lots of food. and just go with a spreadsheet down every single name of every donor above $1,000. And there were about 500 of them in our particular case, and note how and when and who is going to solicit them. So is this a one combined ask for the year? Are we asking you for the gala? Our school did have a golf outing. Are we asking you for the golf outing? Are we asking you to bring your own clients or vendors from your business in? I mean, that was what our golf outing actually was. That's why we did it, because it was almost entirely our parent body's business associates. So it was not our typical crowd, and there were a whole lot of other opportunities there. And then put that all on the calendar and get others involved. Now, it was like exhausting. That day was insane, but you can't do it otherwise, which I think is something that people miss. They think fundraising is just about walking in and saying, "Hey, could I have $1 million?" And if you just ask right, maybe someone's going to say yes.
Sometimes that's right too.
Sometimes that
Sometimes,
does work.
but
Can you
those
tell me
relationships.
your best fundraising story? What was like the
My best fundraising story.
maybe like an ask that went better than you thought, or an ask that went funnier than you thought?
Okay, so I did 3 large campaigns when I was ahead, and in I think the third one, we had decided how much we were going to ask a particular donor, and we had made the decision based on it was the second campaign, because we hadn't used a consultant and we hadn't done a feasibility study, and we estimated that too low. We were going to ask for I think $20,000, and we had a piece of paper outlined ready to hand him, and we're sitting around my office and with a board member who's going to make the ask, and I'm going to talk about the school, and he had already decided what he was going to give, and it was something like 4 times what we were going to ask. And he just told us, he said, "I'm going to give you this $125,000 or whatever it was." And I took my elbow like this on the table and I scooted that piece of paper and scooted it right off the desk. And we
That
were
is very
just so
smooth.
overjoyed.
Oh,
It
that's
was
amazing. That's amazing. I'll share. I have two fundraising stories. One is not
mhm.
replicable, and the other maybe one to learn from. So the first one is my my favorite gift that I will never forget. Um, I was at the front door on one of those snowing mornings, and a sixth grader walks in, and he reaches into his backpack and he takes out a crumpled envelope, and he said, "My grandfather," he said, "Zadie said to give this to you." So I take it and I stick it in my suit, pocket, and I go about my day. And a few hours later, I'm like, "Oh, I should, check what this is." I pull out the envelope, I open it up, and it is a crumpled, decrepit check for $1 million. And I was like, "You gave us $1 million and you sent it in with your 12-year-old grandson." That's like, so I don't know that that can ever be replicated, but it definitely is one of my favorite fundraising stories of all time.
My wish for every head of school is that that happens to them.
That would be pretty cool. The one that I actually kind of stumbled into, which might be helpful for others, is I had to go in my first week as a head to one of our top donors. A multi-million-dollar donor over the course of years. We were in the midst of a significant campaign, and I walked into his office, which was extremely intimidating, like one of those big executive offices with the leather chair that makes you feel like you're 2 feet tall. And he sits down, and I just looked at him. I said, "How do you fundraise? Like, I don't know how to do this. You probably meet with a lot of fundraisers. Can you teach me?" And he said, "Sure." And then we spent an hour of him giving me fundraising advice, which concluded with him giving a gift. It was like flipping the script by accident. And
Yeah.
one of the things he told me in that session was, all donors know that there's a complex relationship here. There's
Mhm.
a relationship, there's a friendship, there's also a financial philanthropic component.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to give the relationship its due. And you have to be authentically interested in the donor for something more than the check that they're going to write. You need to be interested in their partnership, their wisdom, their general communal support, their welfare,
Yeah.
whatever it is. And that really is the pathway towards long-term effective fundraising.
100%. I have another story if we have time.
Sure.
I had a wonderful moment one day when a donor showed up at the door, unplanned, unannounced, and she hadn't been around the school in a while. Her grandchildren had gone to the school and left before graduation, and I didn't know if how she still felt about the school, but she showed up and she said, "I inherited some money and I want to give it to you to hire a learning support team."
Hmm.
And I said to her, "That's fantastic. Do you know that we have a learning support team? Let me tell you about them." And she was delighted to hear about how our learning support had grown since her grandchildren had been there. And by the end of the meeting, and it was so spontaneous, it was so unplanned, but we had a relationship prior. And by the end of that meeting, she was willing to give us the money to support the learning support team that we'd already hired. And not only that, she was willing to hold a parlor meeting and what ended up being a launch for an endowment campaign for both learning support and scholarship. That was my final of my 3 campaigns that
Wow.
I led as a head of school.
That's wonderful. And the truth is that brings us back to something that you mentioned the last time when we focused on the first day of school,
Right.
and you really focused on the idea of relationships. And to
Yes.
me, that's one of the major adjustments that new heads have to make. I often work with new heads who got into the job because they were a great teacher. They were a great assistant principal because they knew how to get a lot of stuff done and they were like really effective doers. And as the head of school, you're not a doer anymore. You are a relationship builder.
Right.
So donors, parents, staff, kids, you hold all those relationships. And I'm going to guess that the reason you had that really effective fundraising conversation, even though it was incidental, was because you'd spent years just authentically having relationships with all of your constituents, including this woman who walked in the door.
Yeah, and this is why I think it's important for heads to stay in the same role for a longer period of time, because over time you build that trust and those relationships. And as a donor, you want to know that there's stability in the school and that you can trust that your money will be spent well and wisely. And so it really does matter how long the head stays in one school.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that depth of relationship, I think, goes kind of countercultural to a lot of what we have and do today, where there's a lot of in and out, social fads, social media, etc. And as a head, certainly use all the different ways to communicate, but at the heart of it is that really stable, committed relationship. And when you think about fundraising, it's one part strategy and one part relationship, and you got to have both those lined up. So hopefully those listening will try it out. As we say at the end of every episode, try something new. If you haven't done something to build a relationship or to develop your strategy, try it out. Let us know how it goes. We'd love to hear from you. And you can reach us, as always, on our Substack, Leadership Lenses, LinkedIn, Barry Kislowitz, or our website, kislowitzconsulting.com.